Welcome back, fellow gamers. Today we are discussing the Set Championships, which was my first tournament that I ever participated in. We're going to discuss the deck I used and how I would improve it, what worked best, and what actually did not work for me. So let's jump right into the deck first thing. Alright, so for the Set Championship, I was running a Ruby Amethyst deck, and with this deck I was running 10 1-drops. Now, I was running 4 Rafikis, 4 Minnie Mouse, and 2 Olaf. I had initially been concerned that this was too many 1-drops, but it was pretty consistent, and it helped me go aggro a little bit early on in the games, which helped me win a few games on its own. So I was really happy with this. The standout is Rafiki. That was the most consistent card and the most useful, especially in the early game. I could take out quite a few cards, especially cards like Snake, Fox, and other cards that have 3 toughness. Alright, so we are running 8 2-drops. We are running 4 copies of Madame Mim Snake and 4 copies of Cusco. Snake just works well, especially with how many 1-drop cards we were playing in this deck. And Cusco was actually quite useful. It overperformed in my opinion, especially as my opponents were hesitant to remove it because they didn't want me to get the payoff of drawing a card. So it got to stick around longer than I anticipated and quest for me. Alright, so we are running 14 3-drops in this deck, and to start them out, we have Minnie Mouse Stylish Surfer. Now, this was by far the best card in my deck on Set Championship Day. It outperformed all my other cards, and this card alone won me quite a few games, especially against my opponent who was running Sapphire Ruby ramp, and I just was able to go aggro so early on in the game. And I was lucky enough to get 2 of these out in one of the rounds at the same time, and I just took over that game for sure. So this was my favorite card of the tournament so far. We have 4 copies of Madame Mim for removal. Now, Merlin Crab was actually my flex position. I'm not the biggest fan of it, but I felt it was necessary, especially in mirror matches where my opponent had a Stylish Surfer out at the same time. I would play Merlin, and then I was able to attack that and remove it before it got out of hand. So we're running 4 copies of that, but again, that was my flex position. And then we were running 2 copies of Maleficent Sorceress for a draw. Now, we are running 11 4-drops in this deck, and to start things off, we are running 4 copies of Merlin Goat. Now, this card is so good, and it's the GOAT for a reason. This card is so clutch and won me a few games, especially if you're able to play it and then bounce it back with Snake and then play it again. Perfect. Just so good. We're running 4 copies of that. We are running 3 copies of Merlin Rabbit. Same idea. You can actually just bounce this and get more draw advantage. Now, this was my most interesting addition. I found with Prince Eric, opposed to other cards like Medusa and Lady Tremaine, Prince Eric really forced my opponents to think about what they were going to do with it. They didn't want to challenge it, and in many cases, especially against, again, my Sapphire Ruby opponent, they would play Maleficent, and I had Prince Eric on the field, and we just traded. And that doesn't seem like a fair trade, but it worked out in my favor. So Prince Eric is a great little addition, and it forces your opponent to really think, and they hesitate, and it's just perfect. And we're running 3 copies of that. And we are running 1 copy of Peter Pan's Shadow, especially with how many rush cards like Fox and Maui we're running in this deck. I thought Peter Pan's Shadow was a great little addition. Now, for the last of my characters, we have just removal. We're running 4 copies of Maui and 2 copies of Lady Tremaine. These were just clutch cards for removal. Alright, so to round out this deck, we are running 4 copies of Friends on the Other Side to give us some early draw. We are running 3 copies of Be Prepared. You can decrease this to 2 or increase this to 4. It's really personal preference. I'm just comfortable playing with 3 of them. And my only location in the deck, Queen's Castle. This card was so good for me, especially with how many people were playing Ruby at my tournament. They would use Be Prepared, and the Queen's Castle would just stick around. Even if they didn't play Be Prepared and they weren't playing Ruby, Queen's Castle was still very helpful to me, especially with how much defense this has at 7. It's hard to remove, and if you're able to have a character at this location, you get an extra draw every turn, and that's pretty useful. So that's my deck. Alright, so utilizing this deck, I actually placed 9th overall at the Set Championships. As it is my first time participating in a tournament, I'm very happy with the result, especially considering 7, 8, 9 were all tied for 3-2. And I just made it outside of the top 8 as a result of the tiebreaker. I'm very happy with how this deck performed, and I wouldn't really make that many improvements to it. Maybe taking out a couple copies of Crab and adding Talkative Puppet, or maybe even Vicious Cheater Scar. But besides that, I'm very happy with how this deck performed.